Welcome back to the Travel Coach Network podcast. It is I, Sahar Rose Devor, the founder of the Travel Coach Network and the creator instructor of the Travel Coach Certification Program. Today, I have Dr. Andrea Leschak, a pharmacist turned patient advocate and a travel health coach. She's the founder and CEO of Wayfinder Advantage. Frustrated by people feeling sidelined in life because of illness, she empowers clients with the tools and strategies needed to build confidence and self-reliance so they can embrace opportunities with peace of mind. Andrea, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. First, let's start it off by sharing, where does your love of travel come from?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to date myself because I'm going to go back to that Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom way back in the 70s. I grew up on Jacques Cousteau and Marlin Perkins. And for some strange reason, I had this incredible fascination with sharks, even back then. And I just knew that the way to be out there and see what Marlin and Jim all saw was to travel. And my love of the ocean, wanting to become a diver. I mean, it was just the world's a big place. And growing up, in Pittsburgh, which was fantastic, but also Nashville, Tennessee, there wasn't a lot of salt water.
Yeah. I know that you are quite the diver, the love of diving. Do you have a favorite place that you have dove in?
It's a toss up. I have three because it depends on, it's also difficult on what you want to see, but Egypt, Hawaii, and Galapagos, very different diving experiences, but every one of them amazing.
They sound amazing. I'm not a diver, but I have gone diving once in the Philippines. But I can understand why it's so addictive because it's such a whole nother world down there. It sounds cliche, but it really is. And there's a difference between snorkeling and diving. You just get to see and experience so much more. I know that your background is in, the medical industry. Tell us how you got started in that and what exactly you do.
So as I said, I grew up in Nashville, and dare I say, my parents, they were doing the best they could with somebody who wanted to live on a boat and study sharks. And I remember this big moment where we sat at the kitchen table and in hindsight, it was the 1980s, and I'm not a parent myself, but when I said that's what I wanted to do, live on a boat and study sharks, they were like, well, how many of those do you need in the world? Of course, then we didn't have Discovery Channel and Aquanauts and all these different things. And so, in my family, we were pharmacists and teachers, and I liked science, and it seemed a good fit. I'd grown up in a pharmacy. And so guess what? I became a pharmacist. And the profession never truly fit as you can imagine, as someone who's with your background, who wanted to get out and see the world. And throughout the course of my life, I've really just hunkered down and thought, well, one day I'll just retire early and then I'll travel. And then my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And that was like that big, 2x4 across the head of where you look up and all of a sudden you go, wait a second, she's not old, she's actually just a few years older than I am right now. And and so it forced me to look differently at what I was doing. And so the early ideas of entrepreneurship, it all started, probably 25 years ago. And I ended up in a different part of pharmacy. I started working as a geriatric consultant, working in long-term care, hospice, and again, just seeing people, really at the end of their life and knowing that that's not the sum total of who they were. It was just that reminder that this is not dress rehearsal. This is something that we need to get out there and be part of. And so when I found myself at a crossroads to build my own business, I kind of laid all the cards out on the table, all the things that I do. And I'm a fierce, advocate as a pharmacist, as most pharmacists are, pharmacists are advocates, but I wanted to flip that and be an advocate first with my pharmacy skills. And yet I have this travel piece that is unique because, I'm great at problem solving and seeing risk in plans or failure in a plan, not for fear's sake, but just, to make sure that we, as you said it the other day, we're sane while we travel safely. And I do some adventure travel. And so when I laid it all out, patient advocacy was a way for me to help folks navigate the healthcare system, and certainly there's that traditional, If you don't understand what your doctor is saying, or you can't have those clear conversations with a healthcare provider, I certainly do that. However, if you want to do like I did with my dad when he had dementia, and then kind of get one of those last family experiences in before it becomes too challenging for him to travel, and you want to bank some memories, I've lived that, and that's this other aspect that I can bring, those conversations of how do you continue to stay involved, not get sidelined because of somebody else's perception, of what you're capable of, and to really, do you until the end, until you choose to step out.
Yeah. You mentioned patient advocacy. Can you explain to the listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, patient advocacy. So when you think of going to a doctor's office, many people, you go in, you have a very limited amount of time to communicate, what's going on with your life, your doctor. I mean, and it's not to be against doctors, but the system is so complex and so siloed that you have a finite amount of time to be able to communicate that information. And so the way that I work with clients is to be, and you can call me whatever you want. I don't personally take offense. I can be a battle buddy. I can be a guide. I can be a mentor. I can be, if we're doing like bad cop, good cop, but basically I can help coach you through like what what your health experience is, where you're having difficulties, and then, try to maybe, ask questions that you may not have thought of. And so it really depends. We can either be in an acute situation, or we may have time, and it's more of a coaching model where, you're not getting the outcomes with your health that you want. And so you're like, my doctor just isn't listening. Well, maybe there's a better way to have that conversation when you go in, and make sure that you are heard, seen, and valued for what you're bringing in, that your insight counts, and that you're not being dismissed.
Yeah. And sure, our listeners are like, okay, well, this is great. We're talking about the medical industry. And then you have a passion for travel. I understand what you do, but do you want to share how you started to combine your patient advocacy with your travel coaching as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I shared that, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so, that's a pretty heavy diagnosis to carry. And in her particular case, she was given, originally only 6 weeks to live. They basically said, go home, get your affairs in order. And my mom loved to travel. And so what I watched with her is that travel, the next vacation, this idea that one day I'm going to take my grandson to Disney, was really the rocket fuel that I think that had her survive 4.5 years of some of the most aggressive treatments that you could receive. And so by watching that and having traveled, in Europe with her, and, seeing how your health can impact stamina and, your sensitivity to food, while also having to manage some of the potential risks that she would face, infection or things like that, we would create this strategy of what her experience would look like, what her dreams, what her hopes were, what she wanted to do. She wanted to go back to the homeland. I happen to be part Polish. And so her whole goal was, to get back to Poland and to walk the Champs-Élysées. Well, knowing that, then what she brought to the table, we would work that strategy of what that would look like, right? And so maybe the trip, we would take smaller day trips as opposed to doing everything all at once, or making sure that she had time to sit, and make sure that she was eating properly. And so by managing that in the background, she was able to enjoy everything that she wanted to do. Now, at that time, of course, I was traveling as her daughter, advocating for her. So I can honestly say it wasn't very relaxing for me because you're kind of walking along, like, okay, but that's the challenge with it, right? If you have a family or a family member that has a complicated medical profile, oftentimes you're covering down, you're on vacation with them, but you're not really ever off the clock. And so by working with me, as a travel health coach, as well as an advocate, I can work with you before you ever start the adventure. We could start, like, let's say you want to go to Machu Picchu. You want to climb Machu Picchu. Okay, fantastic. But, can you even walk 100 yards at sea level right now? Okay, maybe not. Well, when do you want to go to Machu Picchu, right? Are we talking next week? Because this is something that has to be expedited. Or do we have 6 months? Can we prep and bring in other, can we, hire somebody to carry your bags? Is there a way to get your physicality up to where you could climb and do it on your own? Or because time is short, maybe you just need to take the train. And then weigh those different scenarios so that you still get to do what you want, but you've already problem solved it. You don't get there and find yourself like managing unexpected, more complicated situations than you want.
Yeah, as you're sharing all of that, I'm thinking of how important that your services are, because there are so many people, family members out there who feel like because they are maybe of a certain age, or they have certain, medical conditions or physical limitations, that therefore they, travel's out of the picture for them. They're never going to be able to do that. But as we know, travel is something that's so meaningful to us and something that everyone should be able to experience, no matter what your dream of traveling is. And so what you do is so unique in the sense that you're giving that not only the encouragement and the empowerment, but you're also giving the tools and resources and the mindset and the how-tos and the guidance and the support within that. I know that you can take a look at the individual themselves, but do you also offer that coaching to as if it, like someone like yourself, like as with someone else's child, helping their parent plan for the trip? Because especially if they're at an older age, they may not comprehend what you're trying to say to them. But therefore, like you said, there's usually a caretaker in place who also want to be able to benefit from this travel experience and build those memories with their loved ones.
Exactly. Yes. And I think intergenerational travel is a perfect example of that, and when my father, we didn't know he had dementia, which is kind of, I felt like I dropped the ball on that, because you live with these people and being in geriatrics, you're like, why didn't I pick up on this? But what happened with him, his dementia was kind of a sudden onset. He had really bad sleep apnea. He was single. He didn't know it. And so he was going hypoxic when he was sleeping. And so, he basically had a different form of dementia than what people are used to or commonly hear about. And so when my sister and I were getting ready to take our big family trip, she was like, well, do we leave? What do we do with Dad? And I was like, well, Dad needs to come. We don't know how many more we have on with the trip. And we were actually 3 families. And this will get to what you were asking. So we had 3 different families traveling on this particular trip. My dad was over 75, and the youngest, I think, was 8. And so we had maybe 6 children, from teen to 8. We have my dad, and 3 separate families. And so we all had a conversation before we even started this, saying like, okay, we know that Gigi, my dad, has some challenges. So we all want to have an experience, but how does someone always have their eyes on Gigi? And that was kind of it. And so my sister and I would do like tag you're it. And so she would go out with the family. She would have fun on the beach. She'd come up. I'd go down. We'd swap out. But somebody was always kind of in the house with my dad. So he'd be able to sit on the back porch. And then my niece and nephew made a concerted effort to spend time with him doing things that he could do. And my dad loved the beach. And so they would sit and watch dolphins off the back porch. And so we had this whole strategy worked out so that everybody had time to do what they want. If they wanted to go to a museum, if they wanted to go jet ski. But my dad was pretty much in the house because he just didn't want to get hot. And the beach was a little further. And so we just all kind of rotated. And so in terms of helping a family that might be facing this, yes, we get together. I may not be talking with the person who actually has, the illness or, the challenge. It could be, a group, the family, it could be everybody. And we're working through like, what are the goals? Where are we going? What does that place look like? In this particular case, we had a beach house that was 4 stories, but it had an elevator. And so my dad didn't have to go up and down all 4 floors. we made sure that the shower had a 0 entry. So there was a lower risk of fall. And I think today's actually, we're recording this on, but I think today's like National Fall Prevention Day or something like that. And so we made sure that his shower, he could just walk into, that he wasn't in an unfamiliar space having to step into a shower. So my dad had 2 daughters. So, the last thing this man wants is to have daughters having to go like, Dad, are you okay? Do you need help? Absolutely not. He doesn't want it. And so we acknowledged this. How do we make it so that he can still maintain his autonomy in the space?
Yeah. And you say the word risk a lot. I mean, I know, me being on Global Business Travel Association's risk committee, I know what that means. But what can you explain to the listeners a little bit about risk and travel, what travel risk?
Right. Yeah. And I do, because that is part of the problem solving. Obviously, in my particular role as a travel coach or travel health coach, I'm looking at, obviously what you want to do, what your dreams are, but you're bringing me on board to help you kind of do this problem solving before you get there. Right. And so, first thing I'd like to talk about or just mention about risk is it's not that risk, should be equated with fear, or being prepared should be equated with fear. I'm an avid sailor, and I can tell you, when I bring new people on board my boat, I tell them where the fire extinguishers are. I tell them where the life sling is. If I have to, like if somebody goes overboard, I show them where the through holes are and the valves and the plugs are, and I show them where the flares are and how to work the radio. We do this little mini, welcome on board. We're going to have a fantastic experience, but, we're going to be prepared. That's not the same as fear. We then put all this stuff back in its proper place. It goes into the locker, and then we go sail. However, if something happened, everybody has a better understanding. And so that's how I approach risk. So risk is really like the probability of something happening, and then the severity of the event occur. Like what would happen if that event happened? How severe would it be? And I'll use a boat as an example. And as a diver, you and I have talked about this before. I talk about going diving, and people's mind immediately thinks of risk being a shark attack. Now, if we were to use this strategy, a shark attack is obviously a very severe experience. However, it is incredibly, incredibly rare. The things that are more likely to cause me a challenge on this boat would be catching a cold, having a GI bug, from being in a different country, eating food prepared by people that, who knows if they actually are maybe trained in sanitation, maybe food sits out too long. Maybe, the risk is me actually falling and breaking my leg, carrying my dive gear. And sadly, I thought of this morning. People discount fire. And a few years ago, there was one of the worst tragedies on a dive boat was fire. It wasn't sharks. Nobody got on that boat thinking the boat was going to catch on fire. It was off of California. And so when I look at risk, it's not to bring fear into the picture. It's an acknowledgement that sometimes things can go wrong. And then how do we weigh the odds that this could happen and how severe would it be? And then I will help people, strategize this. And then we put it in the container, whatever that container is, physically or not. And then we put it to the side and we go out and have a magnificent experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cruise ship. If anyone has been on a cruise ship, there you do the safety routine, you go to your muster stations, they show you where everything is. But their intention is not that the boat is, they're not planning for the boat to go down, but just in case. So that's the same thing in travel in general. Even just as a backpacker, a traveler, many other travelers I talk to, and especially those in the network, Travel Coach Network, will talk about all of these limiting fears and beliefs that people would kind of put on them or ask them about, like, especially as a solo female. Well, that's not safe. That's not, what if you get robbed? What if you get lost and don't know where you're going? What if, with all of these risks, especially, and for those who are not familiar with risk management is on a grander scale among, especially in the world of business travel, it's just as if business travelers in a destination and, for work purposes, and there's a catastrophic event, usually. Either it's a natural disaster, it is they fall and they break their leg, they have to get helivac somewhere. So really like intense situations. Therefore, yes, the risk of those happening is not quite high or that high, but there are many companies out there who are risk solely help with risk management in the terms of business travel. But risk is across the whole board. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm a travel coach, but what does risk have to do with me? Even breaking it down to the mindset of your traveler. And like I said, those limiting thoughts, those limiting fears around anything that might be holding them back, because risk goes across the whole board. But I like when you were sharing, Andrea, the story about your dad and how important it was for your family to still take him on that trip and include him. And then now you were telling me once that your niece and nephew talk about the memory of them sitting on the back porch, watching the dolphins with their dad. And that's what travel is about. It's about these memories. So if you let risk, override, just the experience itself, you could be really doing yourself a disservice.
I absolutely agree. And, since we are talking about my dad, when my sister and I were traveling with him, obviously, we were concerned about, new environment and things that could go wrong. And yet when my father passed away, he passed away because he fell in his own place, tripping over a shoelace. So the reality is that, as you said, risk is everywhere. It doesn't stop us from living our lives. And the ROI, the return on the investment of traveling with him, even in those kind of, moments where we were kind of having the, like our stomachs a little like clenched up. As you said, when he passed, my niece, she obviously was sad, but we still laugh to this day, and it's amazing how quickly. My dad was a very proper gentleman type person. He always had his polyester pants on. He always had his button-down shirt. Even at the beach, he would not wear shorts. He was just from that generation, of where you dressed a certain way. And so we would so quickly talk about, oh my goodness, trying to get him to drink some extra water, and he would be like, no, sweetie, I'm fine. And my sister and I just, even if there's a moment of sadness, we immediately start talking about, sorry, all the funny things that happened. Just, and our minds go there. And I can't stress enough that, there's going to be times in our life where things are not perfect. But I think that travel, for me, particularly, this as well, and many people that we know within this space, this is really what gets us through. It opens us to so many new opportunities and experiences, and it can test us and show us what we're capable of. And particularly for people that are facing illness, if they're living constantly, and this is something that drives me a little nuts, when people start to identify as their diagnosis, like, I'm diabetic. Okay, well, you may have diabetes, but you're not a diabetic. All of a sudden, if I am a diabetic, this idea that I am somehow not something else, like diabetes is obviously a challenge and it brings forth its own complications, particularly if you're traveling sometimes. However, it doesn't diminish who you are or why you want to go places. And so being able to still live fully, managing these things on the side, and, or bringing, and then like with me, bringing somebody on that can kind of allow you to offload that heavy lifting and logistics so that you can just go out and have the time of your life. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing mindset piece.
Yeah, and I'm sure many travel coaches and listeners on here, travel experts, are thinking, well, you have the expertise in the medical side of things and you are very mindful of what risk is. But why do you think it's important for travel agents and travel experts of all types to include resources for working with travelers, for those who have like chronic health issues or physical limitations?
Well, the way I see it, and, I love the opportunity to collaborate because, we all bring a certain skill set. You've traveled at over 80 countries. And so, if I was going to Cambodia or somewhere that you've been, that I haven't been, we all look for collaboration for people that have local knowledge and experience to be able to share something that we may not have. So within the travel space, with travel agents and whatnot, I mean, or from what I've heard from stories, is that if you've booked somebody on a vacation, the first person they call is going to be you. And so if you haven't covered down on some of these health challenges, I feel that it ends up, you could offer a more comprehensive experience by at least acknowledging it, and then being able to help them, like you said, through some of those limiting beliefs, because they might find themselves playing a little, the phrase is kind of cliche, but playing smaller at the destination than they would have if they're not fully able to share some of this information. I also know that it's not an easy lift, even for somebody that's seasoned in travel. And so that's why, like I have resources and tools that maybe the average, travel, a travel coach may not have if they're not focused on the health piece.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Collaboration is key. Everyone brings something so different to the table. And that's just also one of the reasons why I appreciate the Travel Coach Network so much in general, because everyone is so diverse. Like, you have this medical background. There are so many different spiritual leaders. There are life coaches. People have so many different skills, knowledge, and just because travel means something different to everyone, and everyone can combine their love of travel with whatever it is you're interested in your industry. As we're wrapping up here, where do you see the future of travel coaching going?
I think I see it growing because I think, as you've talked about, and we've talked about in the group, the idea that, we're purely focused on the logistics, using, and I'm not going to throw out a specific site, but we're purely looking for the least expensive flight or the hotel that has the best beverages or something like that. Well, that's all nice. I think people post-COVID particularly, I think that having 2 years where everybody saw how quickly everything can truly change. I mean, I was speaking at an event in Connecticut in February or March of 2020, and somebody was asking me about this obscure virus. And I was like, oh, well, we have coronaviruses. It's not like we haven't had them before. Little did I know that the world would stop. And some of the calls I would get would be people that had children studying abroad. Like, how do I get them home? And so I think COVID really changed the playing field about what people want to feel when they travel. So I think it's just going to increase because I don't want to call it superficial, because I've straight up been a tourist before, where I have, the Rick Steves book, and I'm checking off, like, I got to see this, I got to see this. And so it's not that that's bad per se to taste test, but I think people are wanting a deeper connection and a more immersive experience where they feel like they actually are part of the community. And that is across the board. Like I said, whether it's a person, it could be a person that has dialysis, and they're like all of a sudden going, wait a second, now that I'm on dialysis, how would I ever do this? You'd be surprised where you can get dialysis done while you're on the road. And so being out there, I think that travel coaching is just going to grow, because we're all bringing as travel coaches, we're bringing unique stories, experiences, insight to be able to share with other people that have kind of lived our story.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously I'm biased, but I agree with you on that. I always like to ask our guests, what is a fun fact about yourself that doesn't have to be business or travel related? Do you have something to share?
Okay, so people laugh when they hear this, because if you knew me, I have more neoprene than I do of clothes, because I have like more wetsuits than I do of like other clothes. But strangely, I actually know how to knit, and that may not seem like incredible for a lot of people, but if you knew me and how I live my life, the fact that I enjoy knitting is kind of it's definitely an outlier. Yeah.
That's fun. And is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners about, or how can they find and follow or learn more about what you're doing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I have a website, and I believe you're going to share it in the notes. My business's name is Wayfinder Advantage. And, I definitely can, I have like a get to know me session where we just talk about, what's going on in your life, what your challenges are, what you want to do. And then like, how can we, how could I support that experience? And I'm also on Facebook as well. So, I'm available there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm always available. I love to talk travel, particularly some of these more complicated adventure experiences. And so, I enjoy the challenge where somebody's like,
Wonderful.
I don't think I could do this. And I'm like, I bet you could.
That's amazing. Sometimes we just need that little bit of encouragement, to kind of get over those mindset blocks. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for being a member of the Travel Coach Certification Program of the Travel Coach Network and being a guest on the podcast today. I really appreciate you and enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Thank you. So be sure to follow the Travel Coach Network on Instagram at the Travel Coach Network. You can also visit us on thetravelcoachnetwork.com. Come give us a hello. Join us in our TCN global community on Facebook. We'd love to have you as a guest on our show and to join our network. You can also download your free beginner's guide to travel coaching. You can find that in the show notes. You'll also find, like we mentioned, all of Andrea's links in the show notes as well. If you know anyone who may be interested in travel coaching, please be sure to send them our way to our podcast. We truly appreciate it. And until next time, my fellow wanderers, bye for now.